Hello, anatomists. Michelle here, and our job for this video is to continue our study of the eye, focusing in on those structures that are best seen from our diagram. So this is, of course, in addition to what we saw with the models. In some cases, we can see structures on both places. When we look at our structure sheet, we see that they start by listing for us accessory structures, and that begins with the eyebrows and the eyelashes. So I think these are things you're familiar with and we don't need to label. We're going to start by labeling then eyelids, and we're going to use the anatomical description here, which is palpebra. So we have a top or superior palpebra and then an inferior palpebra. If we want to refer to both of these, the plural form is palpebrae, and that's going to have an AE ending. When we look at the superior and inferior palpebrae, we see they come together to form these like corners of the eye, and we're going to refer to these corners as the lateral canthus or angle, and then we will have a medial canthus or angle. When we look at the medial canthus, we see a special group of cells that make up the lacrimal. Let me write that a little bit nicer. Lacrimal caruncle. And the lacrimal caruncle is actually producing lipids during our sleep. So that's kind of maybe where the production of our eye boogers come into play. This other diagram does a great job of showing us the lacrimal apparatus, which is responsible for producing our tears. So we see this side of the diagram ends with the nasal cavity, so medial, and over here we have the lateral side. So we can start actually with the lacrimal apparatus, which produces our tears. Those tears then are going to be transported through what are called lacrimal ducts across the eye. There are actually small holes here, which are going to be referred to as lacrimal puncta, which then drain into these passageways called lacrimal canaliculi. There is a top, so there's a superior lacrimal canaliculi, and there is an inferior lacrimal canaliculi. These drain into what is referred to as the lacrimal sac, which then drains into what is called the nasolacrimal duct, which then drains that fluid, that tear, into the eye. So we can start with the lacrimal side, the lateral side, lacrimal apparatus. The tears move through the lacrimal ducts, across the eye, into the lacrimal puncta, draining into the lacrimal canaliculi, to the lacrimal sac, to the nasolacrimal duct, and then into that nasal cavity. This next diagram that we can take a look at shows us quite a lot. So we can see those eyelashes and the superior palpebra and the inferior palpebra. We can see the tissue that's aligning the inside of the eyelid there. All of that pink, we can see it lining the superior and the inferior palpebrae. This is going to be called the palpebral, as in related to the eyelid, conjunctiva. Then we have a transparent tissue here over top of the eyeball. I'm going to actually put my label to the side here. which is called the ocular, or you can say bulbar conjunctiva. And so this is all on the outside of the eyeball. When we look at this sagittal section of the eyeball, we can see the outermost tunic called the what's it called? Yeah, fibrous tunic, which is the sclera. And here we can see cornea. Then we can see the layer of the vascular tunic, which includes the choroid. We can see the lens. Right here you can see the iris. And then we can see the innermost tunic, which is called the neural tunic, and we see that that's going to include that layer called the retina. We can also see coming off of the eyeball here, optic nerve, cranial nerve number 2. Some other structures we can see, this connection of where the iris is meeting with the retina. Remember, we call this the aura serrata. We can see the point where the cornea meets the sclera, and we call that junction. We call that the corneo-scleral junction. At that junction, you can see there's like little holes there. And these little holes, so that actual hole right there, that hole is called the scleral venous sinus. And I have another model, or excuse me, another diagram where we can see that really well. So we'll name that again. We can see too that from the lens to that cornea, we have what we're going to call the anterior cavity. And this is full of aqueous humor. So then from the lens back, we have the posterior cavity. And this is full of the vitreous humor that we saw with our eye model. There's maybe a few other things that we can label here, but I think we can also take a look at those maybe on a different model. I keep saying model, and I mean diagram. Now with this particular image, we can see quite a lot. So I think I would take some time in my study to really label quite a bit about what we're looking at. I do want to give you the reference that this is the nose. So right here, we're looking at the medial canthus, or we can use the word angle. And you can see it right here. That hole that's right there is a closer up view of the lacrimal puncta. So we saw that in an earlier diagram. And from here, I want to just take a look then a little bit more closely at this particular diagram. I think I can change my color. So here we can see the cornea really nice. We can see the lens. We can see the iris here. Remember when we are talking about from the lens to the cornea, we would talk about all of that as the anterior cavity, but we can actually say from the lens, from the cornea to the iris, we're going to call that the anterior chamber. And then we can say from the lens to the iris, so in this area here, we can call that the posterior chamber. So the anterior cavity is composed of both the anterior chamber and the posterior chamber. We can see also a little bit better view here of that scleral, venous, sinus. And what we'll see is that this is going to drain your aqueous humor and return it to circulation. So it's going to move into the veins, which brings your blood back to the heart. The lens is going to be involved in focusing the light as it's being directed back to the retina. And what we'll see is that there's a structure that we will talk about as a ciliary body, which is holding that lens in place and also altering the shape of that lens. So taking a look, we see we have these special ligaments called ciliary zonule holding the lens in place. And when we look at that ciliary body, we have these, that's a smooth muscle, and it has these ciliary processes that are sticking out. So this is a smooth muscle. So if we look at this as the lens, then we're going to see the ciliary body is a circular muscle. And then we'll see holding that lens in place are those ciliary zonules. So that'll be important when we talk about accommodation in lecture. We can see the ora serrata here. So that's that division from the choroid to the retina. And so this part here of the eye ball would be called the posterior cavity. And so that would be full of the vitreous humor. Whereas the anterior is aqueous humor. Okay. All right, y'all, so our last diagram to look at here is a super close-up view of the retina, which remember is part of the neural tunic. And what we can see is that it's just a few layers of cells thick. So we have at the very back, the pigmented epithelium. Just to get your orientation, the choroid tissue would be right here. Next, we see our photoreceptors. So this whole area here would be photoreceptors, which include what we call the rod cells, which have more of a rod shape at the top of the cell, and they're shown here kind of in this brown color. And then we have the cone cells. So let me add the word cells to rod. The cone cells are named and drawn to represent that sort of cone shape that we'll see with those particular cells. Then we have this cell that kind of looks like an octopus here, sort of like in between. And this particular octopus is called the horizontal cells. That's then the horizontal cells are in between. See if I can move that a little bit. Nope. Let me just. Okay, so the horizontal cell is in between the photoreceptor and then what's called the bipolar cell. And then we have another like octopus here, and this one is called the amacrine. And that's in between the bipolar and what's called the ganglion cells. So here, the photoreceptors are being stimulated. So we have rod and cone cells as our photoreceptors. And then from there, we're synapsing on to neurons. And then we have processing neurons in between. So from the photoreceptors, it goes to the bipolar cell. And from the bipolar cell, the signal goes to the ganglion cells. But what we see is I'll put them as like a, so the horizontal cell is in between the photoreceptor and bipolar, and then the amacrine cell, I'll call it a B, is in between the bipolar and the ganglion cell. All right, y'all, so that should be it for the eye. Between the video of the model and the video of the diagram, I think we have it covered. So as always, take care of yourself and each other, and stay tuned for some practice videos.